Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm amazed by spring. I just love watching the growth. There's so much that happens during this month, May and into early June.
And this May compared to last May, I would say now my garden it's not in full bloom at all, but everything is just about everything. The ferns are even coming out. Just about everything is established now, to the point where I think last May we really weren't seeing this yet. I don't remember seeing this yet.
No, things just really burst.
Yeah.
And we didn't know what was going to happen with things after the weird winter.
Yep.
We no snow to speak of, no insulating snow. Warm. Was it too warm? But I'm seeing everything coming through pretty much normally, better than normal, maybe.
Well, yeah, I think because despite the fact that we had a relatively dry winter, we've had a relatively wet spring, or a good spring at least.
The lack of melting snow has more than been compensated. We've had plenty of moisture.
Yeah, walking in today, there was raining, and I was telling you last night, or I was saying that last night, I decided that while the ground was still a little wet, I wanted to get in one mow because it's looking like it's going to rain the next couple of days here, and our
lawn is squishy.
Yeah, it's a little squishy. It's a little squishy. So want to get that in now so I can get in the my fertilizer in before or around Memorial Day here.
Exactly. And all this lush growth. And I guess that's the word I would describe this spring. Yeah. It's lush.
Yeah.
Things have bloomed well. It hasn't been overly hot. So when the crab apples were blooming, we didn't get a 90 degrees and 40 mile an hour wind that blasts them apart right away. So things have bloomed well, lasted. The blooms have lasted nice, plenty of moisture, so lush. I think it's lush. But, it's interesting. It's going to be fun today to talk about fertilizing because all this lush growth, of course, depends on us giving it the nutrition that it needs to thrive and continue to be lush. One thing I love about gardening, yards, trees, shrubs, perennial flowers, what you do now is kind of an investment into the future. The care that you give things now isn't just for the here and now to make it look nice now, but it's also what you do for the future. The nutrition that you give to lawns, that's going to carry it through this year and into next. Fertilizer, the nutrition that you give to a young tree is going to boost it along. And so really our topic for today, fertilizing, is investment into the future growth of many of these things. Unless it's an annual petunia. Well, then that's for one season, but we still need to give it nutrition. So the all important fertility.
So is this kind of like having a good breakfast? This time of the year, yes. Fertilizing is like giving your yard a good breakfast to get it going for the day.
The most important meal of the day, or a breakfast cereal commercial. Yes.
Yeah. Not too sugary, not too sweet, but just enough nutrition.
Yeah, to get you going and to carry you through.
So let's just jump right in, but why is fertilizing so important? Because, you could say, well, there's maybe my neighbor doesn't do it and their lawn is green.
Yeah, it looks okay.
It looks okay. Or, we weren't fertilizing when the pioneers came here or something like that, and things were green and verdant. Why is fertilizing so important now?
Yeah, well, a wonderful topic to investigate. Now, you intrigued me when you mentioned, the pioneers. Miracle-Gro wasn't created,
right?
When the homesteaders were coming in covered wagons. But it's interesting. For thousands of years, that they did fertilize, but they used organic types, what was available to them. There weren't fertilizer plants producing synthetics, but they realized the importance of giving the nutrition, so they would use well-rotted manure, fish. Many of the Native Americans would use fish, plant corn with some fish beside it. And so they would use the fertilizers that were available to them. So even they recognized. And of course, one thing that's nice now, we have more options to us. And so, why is it important? And why did the pioneers even realize that it's important? And of course, one of the key words was, even if you do no fertilizing to your lawn or little young trees or perennials, they're probably going to grow okay. But the difference in providing something it's with good nutrition is it's not going to just survive or grow okay. It's going to actually survive. It's going to survive and be more comfortable. I suppose it's similar to a human. If we're just eating to kind of to survive, well, that's one way of doing it. But if we're eating nutritious food that would make us healthier in the long term, that's been shown to be, good benefit. That's the good thing to do. Eat food that gives you nutrition, helps you be stronger, hopefully a longer life, maybe a healthier life. And so plants are the same way. By giving them the nutrition that they need, they'll have a healthier life. Flowers will bloom better. Lawns will become deeper rooted and thicker. Young trees will have better growth, maybe faster growth, more substantial growth, and vegetables, even a vegetable garden, not just instead of just an okay harvest, you'll get a bountiful harvest. So plants are a lot like humans, so nutrition, very important for us humans. So also that good nutrition, supplying the plants with what they need, not just to survive, but to actually thrive and to kind of be their best self. Wouldn't that be that'd be a good fertilizer commercial saying,
Yes.
Let your plants be their best self. Yeah.
That seems like a kind of a nice holistic approach.
Yeah,
Nice...
maybe we can patent that saying.
What are the key ingredients that you should be looking for that are in a fertilizer?
Yeah, just like humans, there are certain vitamins that are definitely needed for our human bodies. Plants need certain things too, especially in larger quantities. So when you look at a fertilizer bag or box, there will be numbers on that. And there are three main elements that plants use in the largest quantities. So those three numbers, on all fertilizer packages, those three numbers, the first is nitrogen, the middle is phosphorus, and the last is potassium. Sometimes they're abbreviated NPK. So nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, those are the three elements, the nutrients that plants use in the largest quantities. And then there are smaller ones. Those are called the macronutrients, those three. Other elements, minerals that they need in smaller quantities are called the micronutrients. Those are things like iron, that keeps things nice and green. Kind of like even in our bodies, if you become anemic, plants can become anemic if they don't have enough iron. So there's things like iron and sulfur, magnesium that are very important, but they're used in smaller quantities. So that's why fertilizers supply these nutrients that plants need in the largest quantities. So when you examine a fertilizer bag, that's what those numbers are meaning.
Is garden fertilizer the same as lawn fertilizer?
Now, yeah. So when we just think about fertilizers, you can kind of hone, kind of zero in on specific plants with their specific needs. For example, lawn fertilizer. Lawns are almost all green, green leaves, aren't they?
Yep.
And for green leaves, the nutrient that is needed in most abundancy is nitrogen. And that's the first number on a fertilizer bag. So lawn fertilizer you'll see that first number, maybe 30%, 25%, 30%, 35%, very high in nitrogen. Nitrogen is the nutrient that causes things to be very leafy. And of course, that's what you want in a lawn, lots of good leaves. Vegetable fertilizer, if you use that lawn fertilizer on a tomato plant, for example, you'd get lots of leaves, but maybe at the expense of fruit. It would produce lots of leaves, but maybe not as much fruit. So vegetable fertilizer is more called well-balanced. Those three numbers are more in line, maybe 10-10-10, meaning it has equal amounts of those three nutrients. So you kind of tailor a fertilizer to the specific plant that you're wanting to promote.
You talked a little bit about some of the other things that can be in fertilizers that you would do like almost as a specific thing, right? Like you said, iron or some different aspects. That way you can also, I understand, like especially with hydrangeas, you can add that as a supplement to the ground, right? And it'll change its color, right?
Right. So you mentioned like hydrangeas. When you're shopping for fertilizers, you'll even see boxes of fertilizer called for acid-loving plants, such as hydrangeas. In some hydrangea species in some parts of the countries, you can coax it to turn from blue-colored flowers to pink, depending on how you fertilize it, whether you give them an acid-based fertilizer or an alkaline-based fertilizer. And so you'll oftentimes see that on national magazines or national videos of how you can change the hydrangea color by the fertilizer you give. Our soil is so alkaline that we can't do that in our area. The hydrangeas will basically remain one color, and we can't change it like that. But so it's interesting. As long as you mention that, John, for example, when you're shopping fertilizers, you'll see like a rose fertilizer, a tomato fertilizer, and those are tweaked a little bit to kind of tailor the amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, tailor those a little bit to what those particular crops would need. So it's kind of fun. Tomato fertilizer, yeah, it's worth trying that. You could use an all-purpose fertilizer too, but you might, you kind of might shop for those too.
You talked a little bit about like our alkaline soil up here. Does it matter what the soil is in the garden as far as like the fertilizer you use? I mean, is that something we've talked at times about that you want to check your soil? Should we be going out and checking our soil before we fertilize?
That is a great idea. Getting a soil test. If you've never had the soil in your garden or your flower beds tested, that's a great idea, because I like the analogy that just adding fertilizer to your soil without first getting a soil test is kind of like adding salt to soup before you've even tasted it.
Right.
And so you could be adding fertilizer and you don't even need fertilizer. Or
you could be overdoing it.
Exactly, which is as damaging or more damaging than not having enough fertilizer. And so getting a soil test gives you a baseline from which to start. Then that soil test would tell you you're good to go in nitrogen, phosphorus, or might say you're low in nitrogen, so just apply a nitrogen fertilizer, that you're good in the other elements. So it tells you where to go from there. And so both NDSU and University of Minnesota do soil tests. For example, NDSU, the fee is about $25, but it's money well spent. So if you'd like to do a soil test, and I strongly advise that, would be to just online search NDSU Soil Testing Lab and University of Minnesota Soil Testing Lab. That will tell you how to take the sample and also where to take it or to mail it. You can mail it in. So it tells you exactly what you need to do, and that's a good advice.
Would you I mean, I don't want to go too far down this road, but in different parts of your yard, your soil could be different, right? Because we've talked about if you are in a newer construction or new foundation, maybe the soil is more clayish or compacted around closer to the house. Should you be looking at different parts of your yard taking soil samples?
You should. So if you're wondering what to put on your lawn, then you would take samples from the lawn itself. Okay. For example, if you want to see what your vegetable garden is doing, I would take a separate soil test from your vegetable garden. But for lawn, and the description on the how to take soil sample will usually advise to take from about 6 different areas and then blend them together in a bucket, and then it'll tell you the I'm not sure if it's a pint or a quart. It's not a huge amount, but it'll tell you how much then. But you kind of blend from a few different areas, so you're getting a kind of a ballpark. And when you dig those little samples, hopefully you're finding somewhat homogeneous, if you've got a really bad area of tan clay in one area, a little more black soil there, most of us would not want to take a separate soil sample from every place because it would just become cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
So it's usually to blend those soil samples from like the lawn or from the vegetable garden to take about 6 areas, blend them in a bucket, and then take the required amount from that.
All right, we'll take a quick little break. When we come back, more about fertilizing your yard and garden.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
All right, we're back and we're talking fertilizing in your yard and garden. We talked a little bit about fertilizing the grass recently. We did a podcast on getting your lawn up into good shape. But in the garden, does everything need to be fertilized? I mean, is that
around
a good
the
idea?
yard and garden, most things will benefit from, of course, based on the soil test, what that tells you if you're deficient in anything, and many or most areas can use some fertilizing. So in the vegetable garden, definitely things will produce better, and flower garden as well. You'll get better blooms and et cetera. So based on your soil test, follow that. But most things will definitely do better, produce better with some fertilizer. And so it's interesting when we are kind of deciding, okay, what type of fertilizer should we use? When you go to look at the fertilizer section in the garden center, hardware store, you'll usually see two different types. Some will be granular fertilizer, the dry fertilizer that you spread on.
You shake it out.
Shake it out. And the directions on the bag are usually quite specific. For example, they usually tell, like on a lawn, how many square feet that this bag will cover. Or like on a vegetable garden, it will usually say, okay, for a certain area, maybe 10 by 10, use this many pounds of fertilizer for that. And sometimes it will also tell around individual plants how much to use, a quarter cup or half a cup around individual plants. So the labels are usually quite good. So the dry granular fertilizers, is certainly one option. The other option is water-soluble types. The Miracle-Gro is probably the leading, the most commonly encountered water-soluble fertilizer, the type where you put the recommended amount in water and mix it up and then water that onto the plant. Now, one thing that's interesting about the two different types, granular fertilizer, the dry fertilizer that you put on, that has to turn into a liquid solution that can be taken up by the roots. Roots don't have teeth, so they can't eat the granular fertilizer like you would breakfast cereal. So that granular fertilizer has to turn into a solution that then the roots can drink on in. And so when a person applies granular fertilizer, it's important to follow it up with some moisture, either water it or rain. That's why with lawn fertilizer, many of us try to time that right before some rain is expected.
Right.
So the rain is going to come, it'll dissolve the granules, move it into the root zone, and the roots can then drink it on up. So if you're using granular fertilizer, for example, around perennials, either water it in afterwards, or maybe incorporate it into the soil a little bit. Do it before a rain, but though it's important that those granules have to turn into a solution. And of course, granules, very convenient, great. The water-soluble types, you see, are already in a water solution. So sometimes the water-soluble types will have an even faster effect. That's why the water-soluble types are so popular for everything from houseplants to, I use water-soluble types a lot. I mix, I mix the appropriate amount up in a 5-gallon jug or 5-gallon pail and then watered on things like the clematis vines and perennials, because I know then that solution is immediately available to the roots.
Okay.
And so it's sometimes a little quicker. The granules don't have to dissolve like they do a dry fertilizer, but both definitely have their place.
It's almost like getting an IV, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. Good analysis.
What about organic fertilizer?
Organic fertilizer.
We talked a little bit about that,
Right. The difference between organic fertilizer and synthetic fertilizers are man-made, manufactured fertilizers. Now, both organic or synthetic, both have nutrients in them. And now, organic fertilizers have certain advantages. Organic fertilizers also tend to also improve the soil. Organic fertilizers are things like manures and composts, things like that. So they have nutrients, but they also have the structure of them is such that it usually improves the soil too. Adding manure, compost, nutrition, plus it makes the soil easier to work too. Organic fertilizers are a little slower acting, a little slower to maybe release the nutrients and be absorbed by the root system, but they're longer lasting. You get a nice slow release of the nutrients. So many people love the organic type fertilizers. But I guess one disadvantage is they take some time to release those nutrients. The synthetic fertilizers, the man-made fertilizers, have the advantage of being a little more readily available, faster available, but many of them disappear quicker. They're maybe used up quicker by the plants unless you get a slower release type. Those are available too. So both the organic and the synthetic both have their places, have their benefits.
When you use like a granular, we were talking about that, like let's say you were to use that in a part of the garden that's kind of established and you just want to give everything, like you said, like you give it a little nutrients at the beginning of the year. It's like I'm thinking in my garden where we have wood chips down. Would I want to pull the wood chips away from that area and then apply the granular directly to the soil, then water it in, and then put the wood chips back over?
That's a very good point, especially with the granular type fertilizers. If you just sprinkle them on top of the wood chip mulch, they've got to kind of find their way down into the soil, and maybe they'll hang up in between the little wood chip fibers and never get there. Maybe they'll dissolve and that solution will work its way down. But the better approach is, as you suggested, pull away the wood chip or other mulch and incorporate those granules down into the soil around a plant and then water it in or let the rain come and then put the mulch back on.
And how far out from like let's say the base of the plant, how far out should you be putting that do you put it right around the stem of the say it's a shrub or a flower or something like that, or do you want it out a little bit on the perimeter, a little bit further out?
Yeah, well, when we talk about fertilizing trees, we're going to mention keeping the fertilizer kind of along the outer drip line of the tree where the kind of feeder roots are. But with shrubs, perennials, rhubarb plants that you're fertilizing, it's mostly to keep them closer to, and when I say closer to, within probably a foot or at most 2 feet from the stem of the plant itself. And so perennials, you're maybe moving it out a foot from the central stems, but it's important too not to let the granular fertilizer touch the stems because it could be too burning, too caustic. If ever you stuck your hand in a granular fertilizer thing, if you have a cut or something, I don't advise putting your hand in fertilizer, but if you've ever done that, it's quite caustic, burning, and so don't let the granular fertilizer get right next to the stem of plants. And that's one advantage of the water-soluble types. When you water those on through wood chip mulch, that solution will go down and hit the roots right away. So you don't necessarily have to peel back the mulch for that. And there's less chance of it burning the stems. But sometimes in some locations where you can't be hauling water out to something, a bucket of granules taken out and put a little around each can be a lot more convenient than the water-soluble types.
How about, I've seen fertilizer spikes. How do those work, and what are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, well, fertilizer spikes are, for example, driven around a new tree, and maybe the directions suggest one spike if it's a little tree, a certain diameter, 2 spikes if it's a little bigger. But there's a better way of fertilizing, okay? Because that fertilizer spike, it's got nutrition, but it gives a localized nutrition to the roots that are in that area. Those fertilizer spikes aren't going to distribute the nutrition all around the root system, as well as a granular type or a water-soluble type. So they're probably better than no nutrition, but But if you follow me, they just aren't getting the nutrition all around the root system way the other.
It sounds like
types.
it's almost going to help that side of the tree and not the other side
exactly.
of the tree.
And nutrition can be kind of localized going up into. Instead of moving laterally, many of these nutrients and sap and water go from one area of the tree straight up and out. So providing a localized hit of fertilizer probably is not as good as distributing it throughout the whole root system.
All right, we're going to take another little break. When we come back, more with fertilizing the garden and your yard.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
Okay, we're back and we're talking about fertilizing your yard and especially your garden. And one of the things I wanted to ask about is how about fertilizing a hanging basket? A lot of us use that, and they can get fair amount of water. Fertilizing, what would you say for that? And is it important in hanging basket? Because we're talking about like something like petunias, which will go gangbusters. If you fertilize it, will it even improve that? Will you get even more?
You do. Hanging baskets, and we could also include most container annuals that a person is. We could group most of those together. Yeah, potted annual flowers. And oh boy, do they ever respond to the nutrition. They love it. They're called heavy feeders. And so the more fertilizer you give them, the more frequency really, they're going to bloom better. Now, if you've ever observed many of our cities going along and watering those hanging baskets out of a big tank truck, every time they water, they're watering with that blue solution, which is a fertilizer solution.
Okay.
So many cities with these beautiful hanging baskets up and down the streets are fertilizing with a dilute fertilizer with every watering. And so that's one option. On most fertilizer, like the water-soluble types, there's a rate for if you're fertilizing with every watering. And that works. That works beautifully. Or there's usually another rate for if you're just occasionally fertilizing. So for hang basket or any potted type outdoor petunias, other annual flowers, once a week, once every 2 weeks would be good to at least every 2 weeks be giving a water-soluble type fertilizer. You can also add slow-release fertilizer. There are little beads that you can use. Garden centers sell slow-release fertilizer. It tells you how many scoops full to give in a certain size pot, so you can do that as well. Those are little beads that sometimes you see in potting mix. Some potting mixes come with that already in it. And but even so, if you use one of the slow release, you can still use the water soluble types to supplement it. The directions on the slow release type, indicate that. So yes, fertilizing those definitely important. So either a continual type fertilizer at a weaker rate, or the little stronger rate once a week or every 2 weeks.
I want to check on something there.
And that can be done all growing season.
Okay, all the way through.
All the way through.
When we're talking about, especially like with overhead planters, you were talking about like if you're out in the city and they've got overhead planters or hanging baskets, and they use those big hooks and they're watering. And with that, a lot of times they're trying to water the ground. We say you don't want to water the leaves necessarily, but in something like that where it's hard maybe to get to it because it's just overfilling. And you're watering with probably a water soluble fertilizer there, just because we had talked earlier about you wouldn't want to have fertilizer touching the stem. Is there a danger in watering with water soluble fertilizer and getting it on the leaves? I mean, how sensitive is something like that? Or is that kind of one of the benefits of water soluble is because of the water there, it's a little I don't want to say diluted, but it's not as concentrated.
Yeah, it's a little more leaf friendly,
Okay.
a little more stem friendly, but you bring up a good point because we should not apply that fertilizer during the heat of the day, the sun of the day,
Okay.
because the little fertilizer droplets, the liquid fertilizer solution droplets that would be on leaves and the sun activity through that can cause some leaf spotting and can also cause spotting on the blossoms. So as you indicate, sometimes you can't always, in a hanging basket or a container, you can't always just do the soil because the whole thing is filled with plants and leaves. And so, but if you fertilize either in early morning or in the evening, I know in the evening you kind of aren't supposed to get leaves wet. But the best time is probably to do this in early morning, do the fertilizing. That's when you see most of the municipalities going along in the early morning, fertilizing, applying that. But yeah, definitely, you could cause problems by fertilizing in the sunny heat of the day.
When should I start fertilizing vegetable gardens?
As soon as everything is up and growing, or for example, when you set out tomato plants or other plants, you can start fertilizing immediately and get them off. That'll help the roots go on in. And many people even use a little kind of a starter fertilizer, the water-soluble type. And when you're first watering in those tomato plants or other transplants, to water them in with a little bit of water-soluble fertilizer. That works too. Or you can, after you've got everything out and it's growing, you can what's called side dress. You can, right alongside the row, put granular fertilizer and work that in a little bit alongside the row as well. Or you can, there's all kinds of options. Many people might have their vegetable garden in. Mine's been too wet. I don't have our vegetable garden in yet. Yeah. But one alternative too is to, for example, in a patch of potatoes, you could follow the directions for that size patch, distribute the dry granular fertilizer, work it in a little bit, and then plant your potatoes. So you can fertilize either before or after planting.
We talked about tomatoes. We know that tomatoes are heavy feeders. What other plants, either in your vegetable garden or just in general, what are some heavy feeders that people should maybe take note of that we could give people a heads up on and say, hey, if you've got this or you plan on this, be aware this one may need a little more nutrition.
Yeah, any of the vegetables that produce a fruit, tomatoes. I love that discussion too. Is tomato a fruit or vegetable? Right. But things that are producing, botanical fruits like
produce that is producing. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, pumpkins really respond well to that extra fertilizer. And also, if it's an underground structure, potatoes, potato tubers, carrots, they all love that extra nutrition. Things that probably require less nutrition are probably the leafy vegetables.
Okay.
You still get more leaves if you do fertilize, but, it's especially important with, tomatoes and potatoes.
What about in a flowering or just a garden or a garden bed, any shrubs or other, you said that petunias are heavy feeders. Anything else that you think of that comes to mind as a particularly heavy feeder that's going to want more than everything else?
Yeah, raspberries, strawberries, anything that produces our good edible fruits like that really do respond well to extra fertilizer.
So how late in the year should we be fertilizing? Because we talked about, when we were talking about lawns, you said you really want to get it in around Memorial Day, and then even more importantly, again, around Labor Day. But really between the peak of the summer, you don't want to be fertilizing. How about for plants? When do we want to be fertilizing then?
Yeah, the two most important months for fertilizing most of the things are May and June. For example, perennial flowers, including things like tulips, even the bulbs that bloomed in May, and any of the perennials that we've got growing, everything from iris to peonies to you name it, all of the perennial flowers love being fertilized in May and again in June. And because these are the months that they're actively growing, they're producing flowers, they're producing lots of leaves, and so perennials love May, at least once in May and once in June, and vegetables also May and June during the periods of active growth. Vines such as clematis vine. Again, once in May at least, and once in June, whether you're using granular or the water-soluble types, give it some good nutrition May and again in June. The annual flowers, just keep fertilizing those all through the season. Any of the shrubs, for example, aronia, that are going to produce berries, also fertilize. Older shrubs really don't need, they've got a more established root system. They don't really need extra fertilizer if you don't want to. But these months of May and June are the active growth months, and that's when this extra nutrition applied in the form of fertilizer will be especially beneficial. Because, it's interesting when we watch our perennials and they're putting a lot of growth during this first half of the growing season. And so that's why we fertilize them accordingly.
Let's talk a little bit about trees and shrubs, because we talked about kind of like established shrubs probably don't need fertilizer. But so like new trees and shrubs, would you say give them a good fertilizer?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, when you plant a new tree or a new shrub, almost all of us want that thing to grow fast.
Right.
We're impatient. We want to sit under the shade of that tree, or we want a shrub to fill in along our foundation. And so giving it the nutrition when it's young, for example, a young tree that's newly planted, maybe give it some fertilizer during its first 5 years or so. After that time, the root system is established out. It's finding that nutrition in the soil, in the natural soil. So after that point, you really don't need to be fertilizing established trees. They're finding their nutrition, and the roots are so far out, it would be hard to fertilize those anyway. And same with established shrubs. The first few years, maybe the first 3, 4, 5 years, fertilize the shrubbery to get them to grow better, a little more boost of growth, get them to root out really good. And but after that point, after the 5 years or so, most of the shrubs don't really need fertilizing either. But that brings up the interesting point. Okay, remember I mentioned important to fertilize many of these things in May and June. Okay, annuals and vegetables keep fertilizing all summer. Okay, but perennials and even young trees, shrubs, May and June, but then stop the 4th of July. And here's the reason for that. Their active growth periods are May and June. That's when they're putting out all this growth, leaves, stems, forming flowers. But after the 4th of July, if we were to fertilize, it could coax new lush growth too late in the season. And when that growth is formed too late in the season, it doesn't have time to toughen up or harden off before winter sets in. And that lush growth that's formed too late in the season could freeze off over winter time. And so if you fertilize in May and June, by the end of June at least, there's enough nutrition there in the soil to carry it through, to carry those perennials, young trees, young shrubs, strawberries, raspberries, rhubarb. There's enough nutrition there to carry it through the last half of the summer. So that's why July 4th is called Independence Day for gardeners, because there are some things that we no longer do after July 4th. And one of those is fertilizing trees, shrubs, perennials, strawberries, raspberries, rhubarb.
When you were talking about a tree that's maybe 5 years old or some, established a bit, that it'll be getting the nutrition from the yard, and I was thinking, is that another benefit to fertilizing your lawn? Will those nutritions will those be taken up a little bit by trees, or is it
definitely.
Will that just say slow surface level that'll just help the blades?
Yeah, definitely. And that is one reason why we usually do not have to fertilize older established trees, because if we're giving the lawn the nutrition it needs, the extra nitrogen and nutrients are moving down in, and they're accessible by tree roots as well. So the trees are getting fertilized because we're taking good care of the lawn. So definitely.
So one issue we've seen with trees in the area, especially maples, is that they have trouble some of the leaves are coming out yellow. And I know it's happened.
Common problem.
Yeah.
I'm already seeing maples with leaves turning yellow. And my wife Mary, sometimes when we're driving down and see these bright lemon-colored trees, sometimes Mary says, "Well, gosh, it's actually kind of showy," but actually it's showy in a negative type of way because this is kind of a sideline of fertilizer. Okay, we mentioned early in the program about one of the nutrients is iron that plants need, and maples, especially in heavy clay soil like we see in the Red River Valley, maples are very susceptible to iron deficiency in the soil. Now, our soils might have enough iron, but maples are very sensitive, and the iron in our soil isn't in a form that's available for the roots to take it up. And maples, especially in the clay soil, show this iron deficiency. It's called chlorosis, a yellowing of the leaves. And when you look close at a leaf, the veins might be nice and green, but the areas in between the leaves are yellow. And this iron deficiency decreases the vigor of the tree. And if left untreated, eventually, over a number of years, branches can start to die back. And it can kill a tree. It also makes it more susceptible to winter injury, attacked by insects, attacked by diseases. So if you have a maple and it's starting to turn yellow in the leaves, it's very important to treat it for this condition. So iron is kind of a subset of fertilizer. It's one of the nutrients. And so garden centers sell products called chelated iron. And so when you go into garden center and say, "I need iron for my maple tree," they'll know what to give you. There are products, a granular type that you spread under the canopy of the tree. You follow the directions. There are water-soluble types that you'll mix up in a bucket of water and then pour on to the ground area. And again, the directions will tell you whereabouts underneath the tree to focus this. So the roots will take up this iron product and carry it into the tree and out into the leaves. Now, so this is a great time to do that. In May and early June, when the tree is actively growing, it'll take up this iron product. And so if in past years, if you've noticed your maple leaves turning yellow, now is a wonderful time, or if they're already yellow, now is the time to treat them. So it's an iron product that is needed.
How fast will the tree drink that up? I mean,
when you
will you be able to see an improvement through
definitely.
the year?
Yep.
Okay.
The younger the tree, the quicker the effect will be, because there's not quite as much wood for it in the trunk for it to suck up by the roots and go out into the leaves. So the younger the tree, the quicker it'll show some response. A big old maple will take a little bit of time. It may take a month for an old maple to show and get green again. But a younger maple, relatively younger, within maybe a couple of weeks, you should start seeing. There is another form of iron, especially on a younger tree, where the directions will say that this product can be sprayed onto the leaves of the tree. Because if you can reach it with a sprayer, the leaves have the ability to absorb nutrients just through their leaf pores. So a good option on a younger maple tree that's suffering from this yellowing is to apply the product following directions to the leaves, spray it on the leaves. That's a little faster acting, but not long lasting. So spray it on the leaves, but also apply it to the root zone so that you're getting it up into the tree itself internally that way through the root system.
And just because we've been talking about fertilizing, that on some things you want to fertilize maybe twice, with something like a tree like this, would you want to be doing the iron treatment, the chelated iron treatment? Would you want to do it twice a year, or?
Yeah, especially in the first half of the growing season.
Okay.
During the heat of the summer, it probably would not be absorbed as well, but especially a treatment at the beginning of, and usually one treatment should do it for the summer, but it may take treating that tree for a number of years to keep it healthy, because maples in our area struggle with this heavy clay soil. And so that's why I sometimes hesitate to plant maples in our area, because they are so susceptible. There are other plants, too, that can have iron deficiency chlorosis, where the veins of the leaves stay green and in between it's all lemon yellow. Sometimes roses will develop that, aronia, sometimes other shrubs, but the maple trees are the number one most commonly affected. So it's interesting. You drive up and down the streets and you'll see the yellowing. And so that's what that is. And I always really encourage people to treat their maple trees.
Well, that's great.
Because they're beautiful trees.
They're beautiful trees.
Yep, they are.
Well, and it's great to know that the simple things we can do early on, get out ahead of some things, give our garden and our lawn some extra nutrients to make sure that they look good and that they're strong all year long. Things that we can do now.
Exactly. And I really like viewing fertilizing as an investment in the future. Of course, petunias and your vegetable gardens are for this season. But our perennial flowers, roses, shrubbery, even trees, the fertilizer that we give them that makes a better root system and enables them to branch out and become bushy and husky and healthy, that fertilizer for this year is also what's going to help that plant become much nicer and better in the future years too. So it really is an investment into the future. So well worth doing.
Well, if people have questions about fertilizing, or if they just want to send you pictures of things that they have fertilized in the past, and maybe if you've got a before and after shot, that would be great.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Especially of a maple tree, but anything in general, just to show the benefits of fertilizing. What's the best way to reach you?
Send me an email, donald.kinsler, spelled Kinzler, at ndsu.edu. And guess what I'm going to do this afternoon, John? I'm actually taking a couple hours off this afternoon. I'm going home to fertilize.
Okay.
Honestly, I am, because our perennial flowers, and I've got some younger rhubarb, and there's rain in the forecast again.
Yep.
And so some of the areas I use granular type fertilizer, so I'm going to get that on. So I actually... I'm going to take my own words to heart, and I'm going to go home and fertilize.
It's not too wet to get out and fertilize?
Well, the granular, when I say I pause, because I'm going to have to put on my mud boots.
Yep.
But at least the granular fertilizers that I put on, if I can get it down in contact with the soil, the wet soil will help start it dissolving.
All right. That sounds really good. Well, thanks a lot, Don, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for listening, and have a great week.